Hello and welcome to Illumination Podcast with Nick and Kisma. Today's episode is a celebrity interview, Mindset for Success. Hello and welcome to Illumination Podcast with Nick and Kisma, bringing you ancient wisdom for modern day success so that you can have the mindset to get your life and business set.
As always, thank you for tuning in. And if you're new to the podcast, take a quick second to hit the subscribe button in iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. If you want to get the inside info for this and every episode, as well as some free gifts, go to illuminationacademy.net/podcasts. And now let's dive in to get your mindset for your life and business set.
Well, hey there, Nick.
Hey there, Kisma.
You're standing next to me. We usually don't record this way.
We usually don't. No, it's really fun though. We're across the table.
I know, we're across the table. We're looking at each other. The camera's not on, but there's a reason the camera's on because we have a special guest that we'll talk about in a minute. But how's your week been?
The week has been phenomenal because one of the reasons, because it's been a phenomenal couple of weeks. I had a friend of mine in town, which is really great to have a friend in from Michigan, Jamie hanging out. And he helped me map out a series that we've got coming up. That's going to be really interesting. I'm going to save the topic and everything for it, but just look forward for that. And then the day after he left, our special guest came on today. Our special
guest arrived. But back to Jamie, rumor has it that Jamie was hiding glasses so that I wouldn't put them in the dishwasher.
This is absolutely true. So Kisma, if there's a glass around, she's that gold alchemy that if there's a glass laying out on the counter or sitting out on the counter, she's taking it and it's going right in the dishwasher. Right. And Jamie was coming back for his glass because he'll leave a glass out and fill it up and drink it and then put it back down. And
with all sorts of different
every time
beverages.
He's getting lost because he can't find his glass. And so he started hiding them around the house or no, more around the kitchen in like behind this thing and behind that thing so that he could.
Did I find them? I think I found them all.
No, you missed a couple.
I missed a couple. Darn. Well, as long as I didn't have to look at it. No, it was so fun. He's such a sweetie. And it's July. So we're recording this in July. I can't believe we're like right in summer. Some exciting things coming up that we'll be talking about. You're wrapping up your self-love course.
Yeah. Well, a couple more weeks. It'll run.
A couple more weeks. I'm launching the Abundance Drops as a standalone special training. We'll talk about that next week. I'm going on a trip next week.
Big trip for you. Yeah. Full moon, sound bath coming up next week. Yeah. So it's all
sorts of things. So, let's not wait because we have a fun and I'm sure impactful conversation coming up with our special guest and our celebrity guest. So this celebrity I have known 30 some years, and he is an amazing musician that plays principal clarinet in the Hong Kong Philharmonic. So some of you may or may not know that I used to play in the Hong Kong Philharmonic. I lived there for 9 years. Zoe lived there when she was 4 to 11. And I'm just going to stop talking and bring on the ever fabulous Andrew Michael Simon, aka Andy Simon. Well, hello there.
Hi, I just want to say it's a great pleasure to be here. And I'm a fan of so much of your internet products. And now you're getting assigned to my music students. So it's great to be part of it.
Yeah, Andy's been visiting with us the whole week. It's been so much fun to have, I think we all have experienced during COVID, during the pandemic, that there are people that we have not seen in person. And of course, Andy lives in Hong Kong. We live here. So I have not been able to get back to Hong Kong, which was very sad to me. We'd FaceTime, we talk, and he made a trip in for, I'll let you talk about the Clarinet convention. I know you'll be seeing family, and he stopped by San Diego. Andy is also not, aside from being a global musician playing on stages worldwide. And how long have you been principal clarinet with the Hong Kong Philharmonic?
I just finished my 33rd season.
I mean, everyone, if you know anything about orchestral playing, to sustain that kind of level of playing and that level of orchestra as a principal wind instrument, principal anything, but there's an added, I'm a little biased, there's an added pressure for wind players. And so that is a remarkable career that I know that you are very proud of. And Andy, I'm going to let him talk about, we'll probably start this way, something very miraculous. You know, we love miracles here on Illumination Podcast. Something miraculous happened during the pandemic for him. And I think this is a great place to start. What do you think, Nick?
That sounds great. Yeah.
Because, you know, we talk a lot about what is the gift in the struggle? Where's the wisdom in a challenge? How do you take what's happening around you and go into solution instead of staying in problem? And Andy, open up and tell us about Licorice Talks, Andy's Licorice Talks. And this was a phenomenon, so to speak, but I want you to go back to that initial thought, because we call this as well in the marketing world, a big idea. And I want to start there. When did this come to you, this big idea of hosting your own show and interviewing amazing musicians?
Right. Well, I think I should just mention that the clarinet was nicknamed during the big band era the Licorice Stick.
Okay. That's great.
So the name, I don't know why, but I just thought Andy's Licorice Talk.
I love it.
And mostly we focused on, I call them the most influential clarinet players, I'd say of our time, really some historical figures. But I think what was interesting about it was so many people are looking for something and so forth. And this just happened so naturally and became much bigger than a lot of things that I've really tried to force in a way.
Right.
So very simply, I was listening to someone doing interviews. He called them fireside chats during the pandemic. And it was great. He was talking to which Roosevelt, I guess, had during the war or something. So he thought it was appropriate. And there was some really good interviews going on. And my dear colleague and friend, Lorenzo Yaska, the bass clarinetist in orchestra, and some of you might have heard in the Harry Potter movies playing the bass clarinet solos.
I did not know that.
Yeah. He was in the London Symphony for a long time. Always when the mood gets very dark and gray, that's when
that's Lorenzo enter stage right.
But he was Hong Kong in that period seemed to kind of get to a safer place than a lot of the world quicker. So we had restrictions, but we would meet and things like that. We would have no cases for a long time, and he would come and visit every few days. And I just mentioned a few clarinet interviews I'd heard. He says, "You'd be great at this." I said, "Come on, you know." And he says, "Come on, you know all the clarinet players and this." And I said, "I'm hopeless with techie. He's very good with it. He has all these artistic sides." He goes, "I'll make posters. We'll market it." He says, "Let's do it under two conditions. One, the first person we interview has to be Andrew Mariner. It was his principal from the London Symphony. He had just retired. Great stories working with Bernstein and stuff. And his father, of course, was a very well-known conductor, Sir Neville Mariner." I said, "Okay, check. I know him. He's a friend. Let's do that." And number two, you have to promise not to talk too much. I said, I can buy 50% isn't a bad start. I can promise, you know. And away we went. I mean, you'd think you would have taken a month or something and planned everything. 2 days later, we were doing this live. And you get thousands of people sort of in the clarinet community and musicians.
You went live on Facebook as well as uploading, and we'll make sure below there's the links to YouTube channel, etc. But you were live on Facebook. And
yes,
especially here, I mean, everywhere people were in quarantine, you know, and it was either Netflix, kind of reading a book, I don't know, maybe picking your nose, or cooking, or Andy's Licorice Talks. And so they tuned in, and that must have been an amazing feeling to see people that you know, people that you didn't know, just commenting and watching, and such a meaningful show for them.
We had a lot of people when we pretty much ended it after about 8 months when things started coming up, but hundreds of people were writing and saying that it got them through the pandemic, and, you know, joking, you know, because of time zones, they had to set the alarm clock to 4 a.m, 5 a.m, they're getting divorced, it actually got freaky when people were posting, thank God for COVID so that we can listen to Andy's Licorice talk, and that's what I would say the number one thing that people talked about was not just the documentation of literally historical things in our very limited, small musical community, but the feeling of community. They said that was a big deal. And you also might remember it was a very heated time. I'm sure not completely isolated from COVID's influence, but there was Black Lives Matter going on. There was a very, very sort of confrontational presidential election going on in 2020. And it was my sort of mission. We will not talk about anything political. It was a 2-hour oasis in the week to just talk about what we do have in common, because music, for me, music, when they call it the international language, when you're watching operas that are hundreds of years old, what is it? It's all about the human condition and what we do have in common.
Right.
And I thought that was a really great thing. This is not at all a criticism of those that were using this similar kinds of things to express their views in any way. But for me, this was going to be the escape. And I think a lot of people did appreciate that. And once in a while, you'd have the guests would start going there, and all of a sudden you'd have all the live comments saying, well, it's because, sorry, guys, we're going back to music, humanity, what we do have in common. In 45 minutes, go kill each other, or whatever.
But I think it's so important, to have that. And many people might not realize just how challenging that period was for artists. You're so used to being on stage performing, nerding out with your friends about all the things, about the orchestra and music and just all these things that were suddenly just locked away.
Teaching lessons.
Yeah, teaching lessons, yeah. Mm-hmm. And all of this. And that's one of the things that I saw is just an outlet for that. And I love that you protected the space, because I do think that's really important, and it takes, as it takes some strength and some willingness to make sure that those guardrails stay on as well. But I really think that's awesome that you did that.
It was tough. Having said that, we also wanted it to be a kind of documentation of the period of time. So again, in our little geeky universe, from week to week, we would talk about, what's your orchestra in Germany doing now? That what are the rules there? What are the rules there? But equally, if you want to go in this direction, one of our guests was Anthony McGill, who was the African American principal clarinetist of the New York Philharmonic, who was. You're talking about how tough it was for artists. He's a self-admitted hypochondriac. He was extremely depressed, not being able to play. When the George Floyd incident happened, he just decided to record something with his iPhone, and it went absolutely viral, and it started a complete movement. Okay. And it expanded on this. And we talked about that too. So we weren't really avoiding the confrontation, we weren't avoiding what was going on in the world, but we were focusing on the community side, on what we do have in common, the productivity. And I teased them. At a certain point, I said, listen, you were so depressed about not, traveling the world with New York Philharmonic. Your one iPhone video that came from these awful feelings actually reached more people in a 20-second thing than certainly years of being in the New York Philharmonic would have.
Yeah.
And it was a very interesting observation, I thought.
What I'm hearing that is so important, because it wasn't that as you interviewed your guests, and I want to talk about clarinetists in a minute specifically, because you guys are geeks. We love you, but it's like there's some DNA thing happening there. It brings you all together and geek out. But you talked about it through the antithesis of the divisiveness that we were seeing in the world. And I think that that's where you captured it. When you were able to talk to Anthony about his video and how he reached people or anybody else, what they were going through, it was bringing people together which is so important when we're going through. If more people could see that in one another, where the pain lies, where the emotion lies, and one person's pain is our pain, maybe to a different degree, perhaps, who knows, we would have gotten through it easier in some ways, because the world is so divisive. Our country specifically, I feel, is that this is a beautiful representation of how you brought people together through the clarinet and through very well-known, established, influential musicians. And I mean, what a gift, I think just because music is emotional.
Yeah. Right? Well, I was just going to say, like, that's, to me, like, that's the real essence of art, is that it brings people together in different and unique ways, to really explore who they are, what these things mean to them, how we make meaning in the world, and how we just deal with being human beings in the world, Yeah.
Well, for me, another issue that it tapped onto, which I think artists and arts lovers, you could say, needed to discuss. I had just a handful of questions that became my mantra at the very end. And I have to say this, it was quite crazy. I mean, some of them would go over 3 hours. It wasn't abnormal to do that. And you had the audience there. That was what was so weird. And of course, someone's time zone suffered. So all of a sudden it's now 8 a.m. there. So they're getting on for the last hour, and it's now 1 a.m. there. So they're getting off after the first hour. But one of the topics that was discussed, and I'm sure this affected a lot of careers, was this whole idea that governments are telling us what, can you help me? What's the word they use for essential workers were?
Essential workers,
and what non-essential workers were.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So basically, I'd ask them and really put them on the spot as musicians. What do you think of this? That we've been labeled as non-essential workers, and that was, I think, very therapeutic and talking about perhaps the importance. And there were so many young people that you'd feel sorry for, people who were just graduating conservatory that were quite skeptical about a future in music. Moreover, and in music, I think in particular, being with other people, for example, playing in orchestra, there's only so much studying online you can do compared to a math person. That's not to say that they don't want that also, but there's something very special about these extremely limited formative years of what's essential to be together and to work together. So a lot of that was kind of being vented, and it was therapeutic. And I think a lot of us left thinking, well, we're not so bad, we're not so unimportant, and I think that was something that came out of this in a positive way.
Sure.
Yeah. It's really interesting though, that whole conversation, because, well, what did everybody do during that time? If they're watching Netflix, they're consuming media, like these are artists that are creating all of that stuff that, that brought us together in different ways, or at least, kept us from spinning out too hard, and gave us something to focus on other than, which would be it's just so easy for people to get caught into, is like feeling really badly and feeling, struggling with the situation, blaming all sorts of, everything, up, down, and center, blaming, for the situation as it is. And it's so easy to get stuck in that feeling of just feeling sorry for yourself. And I love that, this really helped to pull not just you out of that, but to really elevate for the whole community.
Yeah.
Awesome. I do. It was an amazing evolution. I get probably talk too much about that, but how it just started on a whim as a fun conversation with an old friend.
That. Yeah, back to that idea that just happened, and you went with it, and there wasn't this squeezing, like it's got to happen. It was such a flow, right? It really quickly.
Right. But and what I'm saying, what I started realizing, like the first were a couple of conversations, and I would ask the audience, look, we don't need to keep on doing this. Should we? No, please continue, please. And it was actually quite pressureful, because it's not like we planned it out. We started on 2 days, and within a week, we'd have to think of the right person, have him agree, probably set up a techie rehearsal. Now, some of these people were in their 90s, not just 80s, and who were staying away from young people, obviously, at that period of time, to help them make a poster. We learn how to advertise it on which Facebook pages and what. Do a little research, maybe follow some of the interviews, come up with a time, set everything up. And as soon as that was over, do it again, week after week, just on 4 or 5 days. But what I wanted to say about the evolution was it started as a nice conversation. And all of a sudden you realize, wait a minute, there's some serious history being discussed here with 90-year-olds, who might not, who knows what's going to be. And all of a sudden it started feeling important to document that. Yet my younger colleague Lorenzo, he was all about the show. I was interested in the total views. Wow, people are seeing this over a week. Usually, the dust would settle, and after a week, you'd see how many views were involved because of time zone differences. He was into the community at that moment. He was all about, quote, the show. Finally, one of the most touching things I thought was a few months into it, when it really became well established, there were some clarinetists who died within 24 hours of each other. And we actually got messages saying it's your responsibility as sort of the main clarinet event going on right now, to pay some homage to these guys. Yeah. And we would put people on the spot, their closest colleagues and friends. We'd ask for videos and comments, and they'd literally say, look, we're driving to the funeral, which is 20 hours away because it's too dangerous you can't even get flights. Like we're so distraught. And it was this very fine line of nagging them and being sensitive. All of them thanked me at the end for it. And months later on YouTube, you would get comments from their family members who'd say, we never knew this happened. And we're just so moved that, that people are celebrating their life in the clarinet community and stuff like that. So it's just one thing would lead to another, and the different rewards would come out in ways you never expected.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I want to get back to the show and a couple of the interviews, but let's sidebar first. What is unique about clarinetists compared to the flutists and the oboists and the French horns and the trumpets and, all the strings? Like, there's something with clarinetists that I feel is really unique.
Oh dear, I'm really going to have to think about this one. It's interesting, especially in the United States. Most people don't understand what a quote popular instrument it is, because we have marching bands here, a marching bands culture. So you might go to an orchestra, or you might not you might go to a jazz thing, see one clarinet or a couple of clarinets and say, oh, violin is where it's at. But from the stats that I read a long time ago, I think there's probably 30% more clarinetists in the United States than violinists. Mm-hmm. So I think it's probably the most affordable instrument to start on. Our professional instruments are like what a student, something.
Even with the professional circuit, I feel like there's a camaraderie. Maybe I'm coming from a flutist point of view where it can be a little bit competitive, but I feel like there's a camaraderie. Hey, what mouthpiece are you playing? I hear you guys talk, because flutists in an orchestra sit in front of the clarinetists. Everyone, you'll hear, hey, you try this reed. Of course, you might not be doing it. And hey, what mouthpiece? Are you going to go to this mouthpiece maker? There's like a geeking out on equipment, and you'll play and you'll listen. I don't know. I always found it like very touching, and maybe I'm just, dreaming about it, but I do feel that there's something different about this community of clarinetists and how they want to support one another, or they're really, I don't know, maybe, do you have any ideas on that?
Some people have said that. I've heard tuba players say that about themselves. I've certainly heard that about flute players, what you're saying. It is funny. Mark Gould, who, he was a retired principal trumpeter with the Met, and one of my guests, when we started venturing out of it, he wrote a book called Orchestra Confidential, and in it he literally does all these stereotypes of the instrumentalists. And maybe it's not right to say, but I was just shocked by how accurate it was. And one thing, it was so funny. I was in Shanghai. I remember reading it, and he says, the flutists what do you say? The flutists like to stick with themselves. Once in a while, they'll hang out with a laid back clarinet player. Well, we have a flutist in our orchestra who married our second clarinet player, was very laid back. I just took a photo of that and WhatsApped her. So, I probably something's too about that. And you're right. We have so many weird equipment things to worry about.
Yeah, maybe it's an equipment thing. There's a quest, right?
The reed making.
Oh, yeah.
Like that's a whole other, whole other.
I know oboists do that too, and bassoonists, but there's some, anyways, I just really appreciate clarinetists. Back to the show. And then I want to talk about some other aspects of your career because it has been so fascinating. A couple of the interviews for you, perhaps one that was most difficult to get and one that was most surprising for you when you had a guest and if you were surprised that it went in this direction or that they showed up a certain way.
Difficulty is easy. And again, it was part of the show. We had a guest, most of my guests I knew, we had a terrific guest. She's the retired principal of the Los Angeles Philharmonic. Wow, you talk about talking points. Well, you could say maybe this was surprising because I didn't know that much about her. You start with this. She's the first female principal in the world of a major orchestra. Okay, let's just start with that. And what does that mean? And you were 18 years old and your dad was the other principal, and you just start with that and where women in orchestras are then compared to now and where they're going maybe. Start with the fact that, people that we think of these historical figures like Aaron Copland, she'd play the Copland Clarinet Concerto with Copland conducting. John Williams, the movie composer, as a favor wrote her a concerto. So I was quite, overwhelmed with that. But the most important thing in getting to the other question is she very unusually, again, a maverick, plays a German system instrument, which might not sound like a big deal to your listeners, but it's almost like playing another instrument. It's a completely different sound. And virtually no one plays that in this country. She decided, I like the sound. I'm going to relearn this. I'm going to do this. Well, there's a very well-known woman soloist, Sabine Meyer, in Germany, who's very shy about her English and very shy about internet interviews. But she was probably one of the most obvious guests that you wanted. And you search the internet, you cannot find anything on her.
Her career is massive.
Yeah. So Wurlitzer, which is the maker of these German instruments for both of them, right, asked me after Michelle's interview. She said it was so fun. This was the her name escapes me. Her surname's Wurlitzer, I think, the daughter of the founder. And she says, we'd like to have an English language page on our website dedicated to your interviews of our artists. Is that okay? I said, yeah, sure. So she brings up Michelle's interview there. Well, I found out that the manager of Sabine Meyer is a clarinetist from Taiwan, a fan of the show. I'll ask her. Yeah, okay. She really doesn't like English language. She doesn't like internet interviews. Okay. A few other venues, no. Out of nowhere, I get an email 5-6 weeks later from her husband, who's also a well-known clarinetist, and says, we don't normally do this, but we saw Michelle's interview on the website. It was so fun and different. Where do we sign up?
That is amazing. Talk about another manifestation, right? Like not seeing it coming.
Yeah. So you could say that was a tough one to get, but well worth it. And it wasn't that much trouble. It was just focusing on what's in front of us, making it good, make it, from the spontaneity or whatever, and that become more attractive. And it just branches out and so forth.
Let's take that for a minute, focusing on what's in front of us.
Okay.
Because that applies to when you're performing. That applies to certainly our world, Nick, when we're coaching or helping people. It's like this present moment is so important because it's the one that creates the mindset, the vibration of where you'll follow through and create your next one. how does that play out for you as a performer? What do you see? I mean, I know when I flash back, what would happen if a performer jumps ahead too far and starts thinking like, oh my gosh, that solo's coming up, or is this going to happen? What happens to the mindset and just the overall essence and energy of that performance when you're basically saying when you're not in the present moment?
Right. Okay. I need to start with, I've been doing this a long time and I'm extremely far from having mastered that. I just listened actually to meditation today talking about perfectionism and just get that judgmental gene out there, that evaluating gene out there away from you.
Yeah.
But living in the present, I think it is a huge deal. The first thing you have to do is you can't either celebrate or commiserate the past before we get into the future. Okay. Mm-hmm. So the key, there was a well-known trumpeter I remember in the Chicago Symphony, and people would always say, yeah, he made mistakes rarely, but when he did, it was his mission that the next solo was going to be the greatest thing you ever heard. So that was, it's very important not to celebrate or commiserate the past, and it's very easy to get tied up in the future. Then all of a sudden you're like, whoops, in the present. Music is a tough one because we talk about sports sometimes and the analogies, which are plentiful, the similarities. But in sports, it's kind of a given you're going to make X amount of mistakes. It's a question of how you turn a game around. You're not embarrassed that you were behind in the first quarter and then you turn around and it's all over YouTube. We as musicians, I think maybe to a fault, we're playing against Mozart. So if you played a first movement and not to your satisfaction, the second and third movement can be brilliant, but we have a tendency to just focus on, it just wasn't right. It wasn't good enough and everything. So we need to focus and move right on to the next thing, right in the present, not fear the future and not commiserate or celebrate the past. I love that, not
commiserate the past. And I even celebrate the past too much is like present, next.
Totally. Yep. Indifferent to censure or praise.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me think also of not a lot of people recognize, I don't think, the level of perfection that is required of a professional musician. Sure, you may hear a jazz quartet playing like we did the other night, great quartet, but we wouldn't necessarily notice if they're making mistakes here and there. In a professional setting with a professional orchestra on stage, the level, if you've listened to the show, you've probably heard Kisma and I talk about that's the standard is perfection. Like that's your starting point.
Yeah.
Note for note, everything in tune, perfect rhythm, all of it. That's the starting point. And then above that is where artistry, really starts to come into play and everything like that. So, and another piece of this that just in case there's people out there listening who have no context for this, which might be a lot of you, is that you're sitting right next to your colleagues who have amazing ears and they're listening. Like that's their job, is to listen. And your boss is up on the podium. So it's a very different environment that is like, it's inherently
stressful.
Inherently stressful environment with a lot of pressure with the audience, with your colleagues. Right. And that's one thing that I've definitely noticed in musicians is they're not as stressed about what the audience is going to think. They're more stressed about what their colleagues are going to think. Or if they're in a situation, or what the boss is going to think. So it's that much more important, so you hear somebody like Andy through 33 years in an orchestra like that. And you mentioned, well, I'm still working on this, and
just to give you an idea, just to give you an idea, Kisma, who's known me for over 35 years, can tell you, I actually had quite a lot of hair before I was doing this. So I don't.
Yeah.
Let me add, the modern world has made this tougher on us. On one hand, it's fabulous, that you can do a Licorice talk, or you can do an interview like this, or you can I would feel sorry for composers during this period and have them write me a clarinet solo piece and make a debut and put it out into the universe, as part. So that's wonderful. The problem now is a lot of times you're live streaming concerts. Now imagine that feeling, like every time you go in there, the universe is seeing it. I remember we live streamed, I think there was over 100,000 people at one point during the pandemic. We all of a sudden 1 week, 1 month, there's a night that the government says it's safe to come out and play. So you go and then you go back and then it's out there on YouTube and it's there forever.
Yeah.
And so that's actually, it's a huge blessing, but in terms of the pressure that one feels, I can't say that it's made people's lives easier. The second thing, and I remember the first time I made a CD was just over 20 years ago, and the producer nothing was good enough. Come on, we got to do it again. That note's not in tune. Well, that note, and he says, look, it's your fault. I said, what do you mean? He says, you were a Juilliard kid 15 years ago. He goes, you guys all sit there with a score looking, for these mistakes and stuff. So now we feel people study pieces. They say, oh, wow, Prokofiev's Fifth Symphony tonight. Let's play a CD of it. And that's what they're expecting when they come in. They're playing against a perfected product. And that becomes the product. I mean, the music directors tell you, they say, listen, these people listen to CDs. We're expecting that level on live performances now. So those two things, I think, have made it even tougher in the last both 5 years and 25 years, you could say.
And even more important to address this inner game that's going on for people, even more important. Yeah.
I think it speaks to the necessity of detachment. On this show, we talk a lot about attached mind is an agitated mind. So if any performer, even if, we're speaking or teaching and it doesn't go like we want and we're attached to that, our mind is going to suffer. That's not a mindset for success. So I like this, again, back to that idea of it's done, it's done. You're not going to over celebrate because you might lose focus. You're not going to commiserate. You really have to have that level of detachment so the next one can be exactly what you want it to be. And then the next, that to me, when, a musician I know you've played with Yo-Yo Ma a lot. I've played with him a bit. He has that essence about him, I'm going to go out. And I know you have this too, Andy. It's like, I'm here to serve the audience. How do I play? What do I do so that every note they hear, they feel, they resonate with? And that really is, to me, for a musician, a performer, the successful mindset, because you're right there. You're doing it for them. And it takes away some of the stress because you're about that relationship of being of service instead of focusing on oneself alone.
Yeah. And hopefully in classical music, we have this revering of Bach and Mozart. They're great geniuses. You have to remind yourself, have I fallen prey to, ego and stuff? Yeah, sure. But you have to remind yourself, it's like, I've been to Florence. I've seen the statue of David. It's remarkable. It's fabulous. But there it is. And you need to go to Florence and see it. If you want to hear Beethoven 9, the only way really, we have recordings out, is it lives through us and the next generation. And it's your duty to serve Beethoven. And when you tour to places where classical music, maybe some rural places in China where I play, maybe they had never even heard Beethoven 9.
Yeah.
And your first introduction, it's a responsibility. Again, you that can mess with you here, right. But also, it's a privilege. It's a responsibility and privilege. But you are serving the music and then the audience. It's not about how great I am or how bad I am. Equally.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I always, like, personally speaking, that was one of the grounding things for me. It's like, oh, it's not about me. It's about, it's about Mahler. It's about, it's about Bach. It's about that. And that was really helpful, but it's double-edged sword. I want to go off script for just a second here. And not that we have a script anywhere, but I'm curious because I've never really heard you talk about your experience of playing with Kisma. Like, what was she like on stage? You know, I've only ever seen her.
Do we have to discuss this?
Just for a second? Like, I'm kind of curious. Like when I've heard her play, the few times that I've heard her play, in that kind of a setting, I've always really enjoyed it, but we haven't really had maybe one opportunity to play together.
I think we played a couple of gigs together in Detroit back in the day.
But you played with her for years. Like, what was that like?
Yeah, I have a lot. I'm processing while you're talking. I have a lot to say. I'm going to try to see what comes to mind. Okay, I think the first time I played with her in New York, I think we were both under 25.
Jupiter.
Okay, and she was, she was a recent-ish graduate, and I think she was temping. You know, she was typing and Clarinet. I'm not sure.
Production management department.
Yeah.
But
what I remember when we'd have a conductor or something kind of making everyone uncomfortable. And she'd be an easing person. She'd turn around and say, that was kind of uncomfortable, right? Like she'd sort of say what we're all thinking, but also this might sound really ridiculous. And I remember this, you know, I think it comes from a point of confidence too. To sort of open up and say that, like, for me, when I was a young, insecure kid, I think, well, maybe they're going to say, well, what's the matter with you? We're comfortable. We're playing the part. You know, I think it came from a place of confidence. Then the second thing I want to say is just a few years later, she shows up as a principal flutist, you know, in the Hong Kong Philharmonic. Now, first of all, she talks about her audition in a very jolly way when most of us are very crazy. Someone said, look, the music director said, look, you play very, very well. But don't be upset if we don't take you. Maybe we'll have found someone who's better than you, right?
Specifically, you don't get it. It's not because you're not very good. There's just somebody better. And I'm like, no shit. That's how it goes.
Well, right. Well, what happened was they did choose someone better, right? Shows up, didn't like it, left within a week, and all of a sudden, what are we going to do? And they called her up. Okay, so she's joking about this. I mean, the average flutist would say, who does he think he is to tell me that blah, blah, blah. She showed up, did the best she could for various reasons in her personal life. It just seemed, this was great. This is wonderful. Right now, I'm leaving. And she leaves. A few years later, also interesting point, they called her again because she was a known quantity, both personally and in terms of skill level. And it was now to take the job as a lower, quote, ranked person. In other words, the assistant principal, okay, to a much younger principal. And she didn't seem to have any problems with that. Okay, very interesting. I mean, you can imagine in music, how it goes, but even outside of music, I think there's a lot of people like, what do you mean? I was president of the company for 10 years. Now you're inviting me back to be the vice president, and I'm supposed to be happy about this, you know, but she was, you know, and so these are the kinds of things, that hit me, with her. And then just sort of her whole, interest in yoga and so how she had invested so much of her life in music and all of a sudden she's like, right now I want to do this. And she just went there like, and then later on she said, okay, now I want to do that. You know, so it's, she's really made a big impression right from the 37 years I've known her, right from the first time she said, doesn't everyone kind of feel uncomfortable? You know, all the way till this moment, when we're chatting about, you know, everything under the sun.
God bless that conductor. That's great. Thanks, Andy.
That's so great. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for going there for a moment. And that's a theme I kind of wanted to talk about because Licorice, like the Licorice Talk set brought out really brought out a new talent and skill for you. And I'd love to talk just a little bit about this idea. We see it certainly a lot in the musicians community, but I see this widespread throughout clients that I've worked with, you know, friends, where you have a job, you do the job, and that's what you do. That's your thing. That's who you are. That's what it is. And it's really easy to get locked in with that, you know, and this was an invitation for you out of that. And you really shined through it. I'm wondering, a couple questions. One is like, well, what was the chatter inside of your own head about that? Were there doubts? Were there insecurities about it? You know, were you just really excited? And secondly is, what were the things that really helped you to just step into it with the ease and the grace that you did?
Right. Right. Excellent question. So the first thing I need to say is, under this umbrella, there were three or four projects. It's just the interviews just went on fire. The first thing I mentioned was I thought it was important to give composers a chance. Mm-hmm. So I did that. We did a few commissions. The second thing was Hong Kong, not just because the virus started earlier than there was also getting a lot of bad international media. I feel extremely grateful to Hong Kong and its people. Let's just say that, for so many unbelievable is the word, experiences. Therefore, we started when things in the virus were relaxing a bit in terms of the acceptability of going outside and so forth. I started making music videos in front of very famous, beautiful spots. And I would give them to the Tourist Association, who loved it. They would put it on Facebook and pay for advertising and just help them. And so I wanted to do something for Hong Kong. I wanted to do something for composers. I also kicked out some teaching videos. That was really important to me, because it was kind of reflecting and say, wait a minute, dude, you've actually been doing this for a long time. You might not be able to do it forever. And you've actually learned a few things along the way. And you need to pass this on. And if you're not going to do it now, so those were a few things. I'm extremely happy I did them. I'm extremely proud of them, but there's no question about it. This was the success. This was the one. So what I would still is encourage people, do your thing, and you never know what's going to pick up, what isn't. I talked to a well-known composer. I wonder if you know him as a former brass player or present brass player. His name's Joseph Horovitz, who sadly passed away a few months ago. He wrote a lot of brass stuff. He wrote the Tarzan soundtracks and so forth. But his clarinet, right. His clarinet sonatina went on fire. Everyone plays it. And I asked him, I said, why? He says, you just don't know. You kick out your body of works. And he says, look at Beethoven. He says, there's actually a few pieces he named that I had never heard. He says, even Beethoven have works that just didn't take off, even at that level. So I think you got to do your thing, and then let the universe pick and choose for you when it happens, and how it happens.
Right? Divine timing. Yeah.
Now I actually don't know if this is a character flaw of mine.
Should we tell you if it is?
Sure.
I'll leave it to her.
Yeah, right. She can do it without me taking it personally. I do have I do get into drama with myself. Sometimes I feel, oh my God, because I really go over, I don't want to say over the top. Maybe that's just what I need, or maybe not. Before a concert, I really shut things down and do that. The first few Licorice talks were very casual, very off the cuff, and very successful. No question about it. Somehow, as they carried on, I started making myself get how can this be so easy and natural? Oh. And so I would all of a sudden I would start taking naps before, like, you need to peak in the evening, just as if it's a concert. And I would do research. If I would contact someone who knew that guest particularly well and set up a mock interview with him, private interview, and take notes. And I would study all the person's interviews I could find online and read anything I could and form questions. To this day, I don't know, was I just getting more and more serious about it? Or was this me just saying, because you're this OCD guy, you're not in your comfort zone unless it's hard for you, So I don't know to this day which it was. Maybe a little both.
I think a little both.
Yeah.
Okay.
Something to look at. We'll discuss.
Right.
But the other thing is, I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse, right? I think music as a youth for me, let me say this, especially with young people I talk to today, I get a very strange reaction. In my view, a strange reaction when they ask you, what do you do? And they ask a little bit about it. In the old days, you say, I'm a musician. Most people think, oh, that's quite interesting. They'll ask, some people might think, oh, that's a very low thing. Some people might think it's a very high thing. You get all reactions. But the reaction I've been getting the last sort of 10 or 15 years with younger people is, you're so lucky that you know what you want to do. Okay. Not lucky, that you got there. No, just that you know that you have something passionate, and there's no question about it. Since I was an adolescent, I knew this is what I should be doing. Yeah. Okay. But equally, I've also felt one of the reasons I know that is because I'm much better at it than almost everything else. I'm not really very good at most other things, anything. Okay.
That's not true, but I understand that.
But this made me realize, I actually have some skills and talents that I never really knew I did. And interests. So it was a huge eye opener at the age of 57 or something. It was a huge eye opener. I didn't know that about myself.
Yeah. And I see, I certainly, if you would ask, I wouldn't maybe have had that idea about, but if you go, so I'm doing these Licorice talks. I'm like, that's perfect for Andy, right? I can see that in you because you're so easy to talk to, and it's just it's an easy conversation. But you bring up a really important point there. It's like, maybe you went a little bit, neurotic on some of the details, but those are the same things that really have made you so successful as a musician as well. Like that attention to detail, the diligence in your study, and really covering all your bases so that you can come in informed, and really produce something that's not only fun to listen to, but is also really informative, really useful for people in their lives, And I think I really do believe that so many people have that inside of them, but we just get so locked into this idea of like, well, this is what I am and this is what I do. And out there, like, that's going to be hard. Right. And you experience the exact opposite of like, oh, this can actually be really easy.
Yeah. Right. Well, it leads me to a question for our listeners, because I know we talk as well a lot about creativity is a very important energy. If you talk about manifesting happiness, joy, what would you say to some of our adult listeners, or even, maybe teenagers, any age group? They're not going to be a professional musician, yet they love music and they want to play. And maybe some of our adult listeners have put on the back burner, but they want to go and practice or take lessons. What would you say to encourage them? Because I always do like go and do it, but it's not a profession. So can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, I think maybe those are the most valuable people in the music community. Well, look at you guys, right? You were, don't get me wrong, you were serious people, but you understand music, you enjoy music, you support music. There's plenty of people out there trying to do it, but we need support, so people like my sister who went on to become a lawyer, but she was a concertmaster in her orchestra, and then became on the board of a symphony orchestra and of a conservatory. And then her son, who has a successful career in business, but got a music scholarship, okay, which also he'll say, playing the trombone and all those ensembles and the financial benefits already that he was getting at 18 years old from music, and how it paid back my sister in a way. I'm sure they'll all tell you it's very valuable. I'd like to share something. I've been noticing recently, there's so many people I know who went to music school, because I see a lot of young people posting these days. They say, we feel like people are making false promises. You go, you get student debt, and then there is a very difficult future. They don't really tell you enough about that. I know so many people who went to good music schools and became very successful in all kinds of careers. And I've asked every one of them, and almost everyone says, I have no regrets about having studied music. Spending the $250,000 for tuition when I could have already been focusing on medical school, whatever they ended up doing. No one ever has a regret. They said that's what we learned the skills of discipline and joy and spirituality. And there's some very concrete benefits to music. They've written books on the Mozart effect, your IQ, your learning procedure, all that gets better when you're around the right kind of music. They're very specific about certain beats and stuff like that. And it's food for the soul. Yeah. And as I said, this international thing about music is probably the most special. The idea that I can go to Korea, right, and see 2,000 people in the audience. None of them maybe can speak English, and I certainly can't speak Korean. But I'm playing Brahms for them, and it's connecting with them. And they're, posting. You'll get tagged on Facebook or something. They're posting in some language, but what it meant to them. Yeah. I think I almost want everyone to have that feeling once in their life, to actually connect with people that you can't communicate with in an ordinary way, in a common way, and have this special heart-to-heart feeling with someone. I can't encourage someone, on that level enough to try to experience that.
It does, yeah. And you bring up some really logical and important pieces of that, like what it does for learning and all of that. And I think one of the places that people get stuck branching out into things like that is just, it doesn't make any sense. I'm not going to make any money at this. It's a time thing. Like I already have probably already overcommitted and that kind of stuff. But the intangible benefits of it, of picking up the instrument, the ways that it informs other areas of your life and the way that you think and the way that you can communicate, it just is so incredibly valuable, whether it's music or art or whatever that thing that, somebody really has a calling towards. It's really easy to sideline. And I love the way that you bring together all these different aspects of it, because all those things are really true,
Yeah. I love that. Andy, tell us a little bit about life in Hong Kong during this whole fascinating, it's almost 3 years, 2.5 years of the pandemic. I know we talk a lot about it, what has been different, but if you could share with our listeners here, and I know we have listeners all over the world, what has been so drastically different from how it's been handled? And not for better or for worse, just the difference in it, because I think that is very interesting.
Yeah, it is. It is very interesting, and I think the only fair way to approach it is to start from the beginning. Pre-vaccines and different mutations that were more dangerous, perhaps, and so forth. It's been extremely different. Right now, if you just want to know the status quo today, you have to wear masks always. Okay, they'll if you're jogging or something, you can take them off then. Mm-hmm. Even then, a few months ago, you had to jog with mask. Even for 2 weeks, when you play tennis, you need a mask. Okay, that was after it was made legal. Okay, so there's constant at this moment. There's a quarantine coming in, a hotel quarantine for 1 week. And a PCR test required. And you'll be testing as you land. You'll be testing for 2 weeks on and off. And if you test positive, then they might take you from the quarantine hotel. Depending on your living situation, they might put you in. It's a little unclear at this moment. So that's basically where we are. It's ranged constantly, and it's usually measured in terms of numbers at the time. So even in the orchestra, things are different. What kind of testing is acceptable for what kind of musicians? So if you play without a mask, you need a PCR test, let's say once a week. Mm-hmm. Whereas a string player who wears a mask on stage might have to do just a rat test, et cetera, daily. And it really can fluctuate, sometimes a 3-week quarantine to enter Hong Kong. So, and then the country you're coming in is under evaluation. So if too many cases are coming in from your country, they might say, okay, you need to wash out in another country, go somewhere else for 2 or 3 weeks. And then come from there in order to do a shorter quarantine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, that country can get on the list. Having said all that, that side of it, I think, has eased. And starting a few days ago, we have a new leader there who has taken away the judgmentality of canceling flights. At one point, if there were too many cases coming in from a specific route, San Diego, Hong Kong, or whatever, they would say, okay, we're shutting this down for a while. They've stopped that. Yeah. And there is talk now of lowering quarantines and so forth. A vaccination is required. I'm not sure, maybe some health exemptions, but that has to be documented. That's not something. In connection with the orchestra, just very quickly tell us, you had an interesting experience at the beginning, and so I'd love for our listeners to hear from that kind of an overview perspective. But you also shared something the other day about one of the musicians who it speaks to, again, music kind of bringing together at a soul level, who did something for you while you were in quarantine. Do you remember that? He dropped something off. Yes. Yeah. So I'm sure most of our listeners don't know that the entire orchestra was basically shipped off to, Penny's Bay. Right. Just talk about that a little bit. So we have, it got to the point that if you're a close contact of a positive, you would actually be taken to a quarantine facility, a government quarantine facility. And this a year and a half ago? This was almost 2 years ago. I think October, November 2020.
That sounds about right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so on almost no notice, they do an investigation, a contact tracing with the positive person, find out, who he was with and under what circumstances were they wearing masks. This is before some laws became very stringent. Certainly before the vaccine. Oh, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And so one of our colleagues actually got a very, very, very difficult case of it. Now, he was taken away to a hospital, but it took him 21 days to recover. I really hit him in a tough way. He couldn't thank them enough at the time. I mean, he said he couldn't stand up for about 4 days without fainting. They gave him, I think things have progressed now in terms of treatment, but they gave him treatments with side effects. And basically it was like a menu. Which of these side effects do you hate the least, And by the time it entered his lungs, it was very, very weak. So when he talked to a relative who is a COVID nurse in Europe, she said, well, in Italy, for example, you might have not even gotten into the hospital until it was quite severe. Right. So from that point of view, who knows, it could have saved his life or his career. But anyway, so he got it, and we were literally taken to a quarantine facility, mostly for 10 days. I saw him a little bit after the concert, so I had to stay a little bit longer. And it wasn't fun, but afterwards, the taxi driver saying, they would thank you for what you did for the community, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But imagine the shock of being called, and a couple of hours later, and the attitudes also was fascinating. There was one student I saw, a music student who was being there, and all smiles. I said, why are you all smiles? I get to practice for 10 days, she says. I can't wait. When do I have the time and the excuse to not go to school and not, so that was fascinating. As a moving gesture, it's funny. I've talked to people who have gone through war time, for example, and it's amazing. Sometimes it brings out the best in you, in the community sense. And there was someone, I can't say was a really close friend of mine, but contacted me and said, look, I know the food over there isn't great. Please allow me. This person was one of the few people who wasn't taken away because in the orchestra, but not put in. Yeah. Right. Didn't play the concert, didn't play that week for whatever reasons, and came in and delivered, a very special treat of food and insisted to not take any financial compensation, made the hours trip, did the shopping. He was sending me photos from the store. Is this brand okay? Are you kidding me? You know, and I was deeply moved by that. I was deeply moved, and he wouldn't take any compensation, nothing. So, you know, I mean,
historical event. I don't think there's been any other orchestra that has been said, you need to go to, you know, this quarantine camp for 10 days. And you guys did it and you got through it. And it had to have been a little scary too.
Oh yeah. I mean, so many ramifications. You know, it created a little bit of a hyperbole, a feeling of that's not the right word. It just a lot of attention. Obviously, even international attention. The Washington Post did an article on the Vancouver Evening News did an article on it, and all of a sudden, wait a minute, we had teachers from the Hong Kong Phil at our university a few days ago. Let's shut down the university music department for a week. You know, this person in youth orchestra is the kid of this, and before he can come to school, like how the tests panned out. It was a very, very that was one of the, I would say for you, I you know, correct me if I'm wrong, that was a difficult moment throughout this whole pandemic. And yet you came back, had the idea of Licorice Talks, and away you went. Like, well, I've been fighting my weight my whole life. And when the food wasn't both quantifiably and of to my satisfaction, maybe as much as I'm used to, I lost 5-6 pounds, and it started me on a journey, and I ended up losing 44 pounds.
Wow.
Okay. That came from that. I'm also, I can't say I'm perfect right now, but I'm a bit of a caffeine addict. The coffee wasn't as good as I'm used to. And I said, look, if you can't afford to go through the symptoms of detox now, when are you going to be able? And I was able to get off of it for several months. And unfortunately, I'm sneaking back in. But I thought, wow, that's quite something. Yeah. And I had a colleague who introduced me to meditation during that, and which I followed all along. So I can't agree with you enough. I mean, I'm fascinated with how people can take the same circumstances and they have a different attitude, and B, what they do with those circumstances. Right. A great book that I read is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, where he's in a Nazi concentration camp. And he talks about, he started a whole new school of psychiatry while other people were suicidal. Same circumstances. Right. And it was a very, very good exercise. I would.
Yeah. Amazing. Wow. Any other questions for our amazing guest?
I don't think so. There was maybe just one last little thing, because it just really tied up so much of this together. Is you mentioned yesterday, there was a quote by Wynton Marsalis. And I remember being on one of your lives, and I was like, hey, I was kind of joking, because I didn't think you would know that many trumpet players necessarily. I was like, who's your favorite trumpet player? And you mentioned Wynton Marsalis, and you went on about him for a while. Like I was really surprised at how familiar you were. But you mentioned one of his quotes, and I was wondering if you could share, maybe not the exact quote, but just the essence of it and some of the ideas like that sparked for you.
Well, I need to say, so Wynton Marsalis is he was the first person to win a Grammy for both classical and jazz in 1 year. And then he did it the next year, and he's actually also I can't say we were quite classmates, but he went to Juilliard, and I knew a little bit here and there, and he's one of my full-on heroes, not just musical heroes. Okay. So, now, there's so many quotes. I remember just discussing a quote with you in the kitchen, which was a little more technical. And some of his quotes on the benefits of music were running through my mind that I didn't use. So you're going to have to give me a hint about
about the air. And
okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
There was a famous tuba player in the Chicago Symphony who got lung cancer. They had to remove one of his lungs, and he developed basically the myths of this sort of muscular way of supporting sound. He exposed, ended up with much less air capacity, obviously, and figured out how to still have a big sound. And so I would study with him. I would study with some of his students. And I'm not sure about this, but I as I understood it, Wynton would force his wind players in his group to go take lessons with him. I don't know if that's true. So Wynton just said something in a way that got me to understand the flow of air that everyone else was phrasing in other ways, very good ways, but it just connected me. I was on a plane. I picked up a Life magazine, I still remember, and there was an article by him, all kinds of cute quotes like, what was what did they say? Who discovered you? And he goes, I was discovered when I discovered the practice room, man. That kind of thing. But what connected with me was when he described the flow of air as blood flowing through your body all the time. Because we have a tendency, probably in meditation, we lock, we exert, and it's always going. And when I talk to my students about it, you have to think of it as if you cut that, it would be like having a heart attack. Right. This is what it's all about as a wind player, this constant flow. And the same thing with pulse or rhythm, that this is what the audience needs. And if you skip a beat, it's a big problem. They need to feel comfortable with your heartbeat at that moment. Otherwise they won't know why.
Yeah,
but they'll feel uncomfortable.
That's really good. They won't know why, but something is off.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. Great question.
Yeah. And I love that. I love that quote. I love hearing you talk about it because it applies so directly in areas of really in all areas of life. We've talked about this with prosperity where, if you just breathe in and just keep breathing in, you'll die. It has to move both ways. Money has to come in, it has to go out for prosperity. That's the essence of a strong economy, is not necessarily how much more money, it's how much money is being exchanged, in a healthy way. Right. And the groove of that innate kind of presence, to me, like when I hear you talk about that, it's like that. It's the innate presence in your life, and really being with and honoring your own rhythms in life. Whether it's stepping into something new, exploring a different part of yourself or a new interest or something like that, or whether it's coming back time and again to those things that we know so well, to drop in, to feel familiar, and to really keep that momentum going in our lives.
I like that. Summation, but I also want to just hit on a little variation of something. I think, for example, receiving something doesn't, if you feel a gratitude or you feel, as you say, a flow with someone else, sometimes the flow isn't directly towards the person who gave it to you. Sometimes it's doing it for someone else. So for example, if I have a teacher, okay, I can say, oh, you did this for me. What can I do for you? Even if maybe he took me out for lunch. Oh, let me pay you back. Let me get you next time. And maybe he'll say, you know what? In 30 years or when I was younger, when you're my age, maybe you'll take out a student, and maybe they'll do that. And, I was at this clarinet convention.
I wanted to mention that clarinetists have conventions. So do flutists, but just talk a little bit about this. It's a great story.
Well, it's in a way terrifying, right? But there was a very, 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 very good clarinet player in his 30s who was really quite successful, who performed. And when I met him, he said, listen, congratulations. I felt honored. Let me shake your hand. You did super. He says, listen, I wouldn't be here without you. I said, what are you talking about? He says, when I was 11 years old, I came to one of your concerts in Beijing. Okay. And I just got me so excited about the clarinet. And I just thought, I want to do that, and that's why I'm here today. So I said, well, great. You're about to go out and play another concert. Maybe there's going to be an 11-year-old kid in the audience today. Right. And maybe when you're my age, you don't know what you'll be doing to him. So it's very important. The flow doesn't have to go in one way.
Exactly.
It doesn't have to go one way. It's what you do with that information, what you do with that money, what you do. Are you carrying it on in the tradition of the spirit in what it was given to you, and so forth?
I love that.
Couldn't have said it better.
It's great. So Andy, where can everybody find you? What's your website? And we'll have it on the show.
AndrewMichaelSimon.com, I think. And I have Facebook pages with my name and Andy's Licorice Talk. And
Andy's Licorice Talks, is that on YouTube or on Facebook or both?
Both.
Okay.
Both.
Yeah. And we'll make sure the links are in the show notes, everyone. We really look, there's something about listening to these interviews with artists, performers. It's very touching. You did such an amazing job with that. And what's next for you? What's coming up in terms of relaxation and performance?
Well, because it's so challenging to go in and out of Hong Kong, I had my performance this summer. I'm connecting with my family immediately after this, and people. I asked myself, what do you really want to do when you get out for a long period of time? And I really thought, people. So like you, Kisma and Nick, I mean, it needs to be said, maybe Kisma and I don't seem very comfortable together. We've only known each other for 37 years. Okay. So, and Nick, he's the new kid on the block, but I've known him at least 10 years. We've met in India, Hong Kong, California, Michigan, right? Amazing.
Yeah, that's right. Came to a retreat.
Right. And so I thought, connecting with people is the answer. I'm going to a wedding. I'm seeing a few things I've wanted to always see in Europe. So I'm pretty much relaxing. And then when I get back, I have to do my week's quarantine. I have the music that I really want to, what we call woodshed, really want to spend my time learning with all the doors locked. And I'm actually planning on listening to my 28 or 29 interviews and taking notes 2 years later. You see what I can learn again off of these amazing guests. And then I have a week again. I get out where I have to self-monitor. I'll take tests, but I can't work in the orchestra. I'll continue practicing, settle in, and then start a very demanding season ahead.
Right, you will. And I know you'll do beautifully. And we are so grateful to have you on the show. Andy has listened to our podcast, and as he mentioned, he recommends it to some of his students, but to have someone like you here to interview, because we don't do that many interviews. So it's been so special. Of course, you are near and dear to my heart. I mean, I love you so much. All right, everyone, if you've loved this episode, or you think someone might love it, please share it. Illumination Podcast with Nick and Kisma, especially this one, The Mindset for Success, with our celebrity guest, Andy Simon from Hong Kong Philharmonic, and Andy's Licorice Talks. And Andy, any last words for our listeners?
No, but I have last words for you two. I'm so inspired by all the stuff you're doing. And it's so great to actually participate in a very small way. And thank you very, very much for having me. It was a great pleasure. And I can't wait for Nick's both delicious and nutritious a meal about to come.
Yeah, Nick's been cooking for us all week. It's been amazing. Andy, you're one of my oldest friends. I love you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being on the show. And I know that you share it with your students. So if you are a student of Andy's, know that he is an amazing person. You're so lucky to be with him. So thank you, everyone. Much love, light, and power.
Namaste.
Hey, thanks for jamming with us today. And if you enjoy Illumination Podcast, please go ahead and share it with someone you love. Give us a rating, review, download our podcast. And remember, you can find us at illuminationacademy.net/podcasts. Talk to you soon. Namaste.